So another critique that Butler provides of second wave feminism is that a lot of the writers and the writings of that wave tended to be oblivious to class differences amongst women and ethnic and racial differences and cultural differences and a lot of other formal and informal barriers to equality that a lot of women faced. And this is why I said earlier how the third wave was kind of a reaction to the flaws of the second wave and its homogenization of women as a whole, as if they were conceived as just one homogenous group that kind of wipes away all of the differences between them along class and economic and cultural lines, kind of assuming that everyone within the category of women have largely the same experiences and their struggles can kind of just all be lumped into one and represented by one voice in the second wave feminist theorist. So for Butler, there's the political problem that feminism encounters in the assumption that the term women denotes one common identity, that there must be a universal basis for feminism, as if it's a universal struggle against the universal threat of the patriarchy, one which must allegedly be found in an identity assumed to exist cross-culturally. Often accompanies the notion that the oppression of women has some singular form, whereas for Butler, it takes multiple forms. So a lot of second wave feminism just theoretically postulates women as one whole and men as one whole, and assumes that just men as a whole are oppressing women as a whole, which misses a lot of the nuance and the intra-group power relations and power inequalities. There are some women that are much better off in their social position than other women, and there are some men who are much worse off than other men. Some women may oppress other women. Some men may oppress other men by virtue of factors such as each social agent's cultural background and economic class background and location in the world, and a multiplicity of other factors that go into each woman's lived experience and fragments women's identities along the lines of race and class, ethnicity, and other axes of power, which make it impossible for that notion of a singular, universal female identity to be applied to all women. It would be too reductive to merge them all together and assume that all these women across the world have the exact same experience of being a woman and are facing the exact same obstacles and struggles. Butler recognized that it's a lot more complex and intricate than that. For example, do you think a wealthy white woman living in downtown New York could represent and speak for the experience and struggles of an impoverished brown woman living in rural India? That's kind of what a lot of second wave feminism assumed or just didn't even consider. Those two very different embodied subject positions don't possess, like I said, the same experiences or obstacles, and certainly not the same power capabilities or the same goals. You know, the wealthy white woman living in New York may have the luxury of being able to think about, the grand scheme of feminism and feminist movements, whereas that woman in rural India, her main obstacle may be feeding herself and her family to survive, to see the next day, where that's not even a concern, let alone a goal for the other woman in America. One can't readily speak for the other. There's an entire multiplicity of lived experiences for each of those different women, contributing to their very different perspectives and capabilities and goals and perceived challenges and obstacles. So just as I said at the very outset of this lecture that I'm not omniscient, I'm not omnipresent, I can't put myself in the shoes of every single other human being. It's the same thing with feminism. There's no one universal feminist subject that can speak for all women equally. And it's not necessarily beneficial or in the best interest for women's movements to claim to be universally applicable in this way, because you'll be painting with such a wide brush that you'll be glossing over so many important differences, which could be counterintuitive and could unintentionally wreak more damage as advocating for one type of women's interests could hinder the advancement of many other women's interests. And it could amount to taking one step forward but two steps back. So, this presumed universality amongst women across the world, as if they're all experiencing the same thing and are struggling and fighting the same fight, may work theoretically to some degree, because like I said, the second wave of feminism was very theoretically and academically oriented, with mostly white, upper class, well educated American and European women. But beyond theoretically, practically, it could undermine a lot of the real progress, the concrete progress that could be made by acknowledging these differences and celebrating these differences to some degree and embracing them, rather than trying to just jam and stuff the sheer range and diversity of women's experiences under the same umbrella and banner of one feminism that claims to speak for all women. Like Butler said earlier, in terms of this could lead to the misrepresentation and the underrepresentation of many women and their experiences, and exclude many women from recognizing themselves in that struggle and participating as veritable social agents towards that social change. So for Butler, there needs to be multiple feminisms, multiple ongoing, concurrent, overlapping feminisms that take the fragmented subjectivity of women and their experiences into account. Otherwise, we'll miss a lot of the micro level dynamics and power inequalities that are at play in women's everyday lives. It's, looking at the forest as a whole and missing the individual trees, just painting the whole thing as, yep, that's one forest, whereas each individual tree is different. And focusing overly on the big picture causes one to miss the small picture. And this course is all about the small picture. And this requires approaching women's movements from a bottom up, a grassroots approach, as opposed to a big picture, top down approach that just paints every woman with the same brush. So Butler is advocating for an approach to feminist theorizing and feminist practice that takes the embodied lived experience of different female subjects under different cultural contexts and getting involved at the ground level of real community action and practices, rather than just theorizing and abstractifying the female experience as just one universal thing.